Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. And welcome to this beautiful event series that was started during the Hacktoberfest as last of 5 pre-FOSDEM events. And we are going to continue with this meetup even after FOSDEM. And we always focusing on the open source. And also important to mention that we have a code of conduct, and you can easily find it via Contributing.today-code of conduct. Tanya, would you like to add something?
No, welcome everyone, and I am very, very excited today for the topic. We're discussing Python, and I am Tanya Allard. I am for those of you that don't know me, I am the co-director at Quantite. I recently joined, and I'm an open source aficionado, maintainer, developer, an all-round advocate, pretty much.
Ooh, cool. And my name is Aliona Galeva. I'm hands-on AI and data engineering lead at Linkit. And in my spare time, I'm doing two things. I'm an organizer of PyLadies Amsterdam chapter. We are doing Python workshops every month. It's free of charge, online, available for everyone, and they're open. And our last event was actually dedicated to contributing to open source, making the first contribution. But I think the topic of the day today is Python, everything around Python. And on top of it, today is a really special day because today is the birthday of Python. And yes, I also so excited. And we have actually the most amazing guest today. And I think everybody heard about this person. So Talia, what you can say about this person?
Well,
contribution of this person. Let's put it this way.
The contribution. Well, I think this person has created an amazing community. Also, one of my favorite programming languages. And thanks to all of this ecosystem and community, I basically have a career and a job.
Same story. Completely the same story. Cool. Also, soon we'll have a session with Guido van Rossum, the creator and father, probably mother as well, of Python. And feel free to ask any questions you can come up with. And we will gonna give all these questions straightforward to Guido. Guido, welcome.
Hello. Great to be here.
It's awesome to see you here. Great. So, you're back. Okay, so you're back with us. Guido, can you say in 5 words what Python means to you? Just to start with.
Python is pretty much my entire life.
Cool. I think it was 5 words. Tanya, have you managed to count all the words?
No.
If you remove pretty much, it is five words, and my family would disagree.
Okay. And before we started with all this, I suppose, flow or maybe overflow of questions, why you decided to give the life of Python in this, let's say, winter month? I'm just curious why it's February.
I'm not actually sure I agree with your facts.
No way.
The origin story that I tell when people want to listen is that during the Christmas holiday of 1989, so a little over 21 years ago, I was very bored and I had been sort of sitting on some ideas for creating a language, and I started coding. there is a February date, February, but I think it was more like February 21 in 1991 when we did the first open source release. So you're close. February can be counted as Python's birthday if you sort of see the open source release, but really within the CWI there were like dozens of people using Python previous to that.
Okay, so can we round then and say that it was, let's say, somewhere in February, just to make sure that it's correct? Great. Okay. So let's start with all the questions, and our hashtag for today is Contributing Today. So easy as that, Contributing Today. So we got the first question. Tanya would like to take it.
So this is well, we know that you recently came out of retirement again, and you joined Microsoft. What is your job at Microsoft? What are you doing there? Anything exciting?
It's actually pretty much too early to really tell. I'm distinguished engineer in the developer division, or developer, and that's like the division that makes both open source and closed source tools for developers. Visual Studio being probably the most well-known closed source tool that comes out of this team, and Visual Studio Code, totally different product, which is open source, also comes out of the developer division. I've been spending the past 3 months pretty much nonstop talking to various people in the organization, trying to orient myself on what is Python used for, what are people's plans for Python, how can I contribute. I've been looking into machine learning. I've been looking into notebooks. Most recently, I'm thinking that maybe I should go back to sort of my roots and see if I can work on Python performance. And I think a few people will think that funny, and a few people will think that great, and a few people will just be surprised. So I don't know yet where it's going to go, to be honest.
Oh, wow. That's cool. But I think it's immediately led to another question. So before all this event started, in our PyData Amsterdam community, we made a shout out to the crowd and say, go, grab your chance and ask the question directly to Guido. And from one person, we got a really interesting question. And it was, what can we expect from Python this year, taking into account that Guido right now is with Microsoft? Should we expect Python Microsoft edition and Python open source edition, or how it's going to evolve?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of people have no idea what's going on in Microsoft. I can say for sure that there's not going to be Python the Microsoft edition in the sense as anything that would compete with Python the open source edition. And there may be some binaries that work better on some Microsoft platforms, but we already have those. But any code we produce, my intention, sort of any project I work on, will go straight back into the open source core Python. So there's absolutely no desire to fork. And in fact, I've talked to a number of people at Microsoft. Nobody is interested in forking anything here.
Okay. Okay, so now we can relax. We can breathe in, breathe out, and everything will be all right. Cool.
That's amazing. And since you mentioned before that you joined Microsoft as a distinguished engineer, we have actually a question from someone else asking, what does a distinguished engineer mean? Or what does a distinguished engineer do? Could you give us a bit more explanation?
Distinguished engineer, I think the way Microsoft sees it is a position near the top of the engineering ladder. it's pretty unusual to hire people straight into that position. Usually Microsoft engineers grow through a path where you start as a software engineer, you become senior, then I think there is principal engineer, and then the very best become distinguished engineer, and then the step above that I think is fellow or technical fellow or something. I think I know one fellow so far, and he really is amazing. But what does a distinguished engineer do? In my case, whatever he wants to do.
Okay, so I think it's really nice. Right.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Cool. I think I have a question that's a little bit unrelated to programming, but just people are curious exactly, do you have any other hobbies besides the programming?
Well, I recommend that those people sign up for my Instagram account, which is public, and where I mostly post photos of things I see on my hikes and bike rides in the Bay Area.
Okay, and it's
easy basically just enjoying the sort of medium-sized outdoors.
Cool. And I mean, it's easy to find on Instagram. It's like Guido van Rossum. Oh, okay, so I think it's easy to find. Okay, cool.
I had to actually sort of talk to some higher up people at Instagram to get that username, because it was taken up by a fake account that was just posting photos of me.
Are you at least verified now?
Yes, I am.
Like the real and one and only, you know.
And same is on Twitter.
Yay! Cool. Great. And Tanya, your turn.
Yeah. Okay. Tricky question. After all of these years of Python, if you were to design Python again, like from scratch today, is there anything that you would do differently?
That's a classic, and I never quite know what to say about that. On the one hand, you can say that the language is designed, but it really grows. It grows under the influence of external forces. And so you can never repeat the experiment. You cannot go back 30 years in time. If I sort of there are probably a few things where I would have said, well, do it this way rather than that way. But it's really difficult to sort of compare the end result, or the current version, because there's always way more to come. But to sort of what we learned from the current version and apply that to the situation 30 years ago is tricky, because 30 years ago it was a much smaller project. It could change much quicker. So sort of all the mistakes I made in the first 5 years have, or almost all of them, have been corrected in later years. So that there's not much to fix. I mean, there are things that we're stuck with now, but it's mostly backwards compatibility with like code that was written 15 years ago, not what would we do different 30 years ago. Sorry for the non-answer.
No, I think it's still answer, right? So, yeah. But on top of it, so it's a long question, so stay with me. Will the next version of Python be 4.0? And what major change it will have? Like we saw the jump from 2 point to 3 points with redesign of print functionality and raw input to input. So what would mark the change to 4.0?
Well, this is probably another one where after I'm done answering, you'll go, now we can relax, because there may not ever be a Python 4.0. We can keep continuing the 3.x series forever now that we've made a choice that the next version is 3.10, and so after that you can have 3.11 and 3.12, and we've now settled on a yearly release schedule. So in the year in 2050 we'll be somewhere at like Python 3.40. That's one way that things evolve or could evolve. So the sort of, we've certainly learned a lot from the transition from 2 to 3. And the big thing we've learned is don't do it that way. It caused a dangerous split in the community between people who would not, or maybe in many cases could not, upgrade to Python 3, and the core development team that was less and less and less motivated to do anything to Python 2 except there was one guy fixing security bugs in the end. So even if we had a Python 4.0, it would sort of have much better tools for backwards compatibility. We could probably run Python 3.20 and Python 4.0 together in the same process or something. I mean, I most of the time that this question comes up, I just say, don't worry about 4.0. There's not going to be a dramatic change like that. And the other part is, if there ever is a dramatic change, it's not going to change Python the language. It might change Python the sort of the runtime implementation, and it would perhaps be more consequential for people who write Python extension modules, which is typically done in C or C++, than it would be for Python users. And even at that level, we've learned that we have to be super conservative and super careful and give everyone like a many-year upgrade path rather than saying, okay, here's 3.0, use it.
Wow, cool. Tanya, you're muted just in case.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very interesting. We certainly saw a massive divide in the community. Well, when the switch from 2 to 3, where it was actually the end of life of 2. We unfortunately missed the opportunity to have an end of life Python 2 party. I think Pradyun was suggesting it for Python US that just passed, but there was no in-person Python US.
That was very sad. I had been looking forward to that party.
Okay, and moving away from Python, what do you think is the most promising, or what do you find the most promising new programming language, and what do you like about it?
Oh, let's see. I'm not keeping up with like the really young languages, but from what I sort of hear around me, Rust is very popular, and sort of Rust is going to be pretty big. But I don't think that Rust is the kind of language that would replace Python. They're really aimed at sort of different audiences, and they're aimed at solving different problems, and they sort of the languages have different values. But what I like about Rust is that it also has a really passionate community, and the language is sort of being developed really with a community. Another language that I recommend keeping an eye on is Typescript, which is sort of an evolution of JavaScript. And I don't know, maybe everyone here has heard of Typescript and has written more code in Typescript than I have. But if you haven't, if you are currently using JavaScript, for something, it's definitely worth learning about TypeScript and how it sort of maps to JavaScript that adds typing, just like what we did to Python, in fact, about 6 years ago when we added optional static typing annotations to Python.
Cool. And I think that's the most lovely part of it, because then you have MyPy that can help you to check all your parameters inputs and notify you on all errors.
Exactly.
Cool. And about, just to add some info about Rust and as well about like the JavaScript related languages. So first of all, for Rust, actually the last week's episode was dedicated to Rust. So for anybody who wants to check it once more or check, you can just go and check recording the Contributing today. And to move a little bit to the direction of, it's not a JavaScript, but okay, let's say Node.js. So will there be work on dependency management? And what do I mean by that? The requirements.txt file. They have their limitation, but they are still the norm. For example, Azure Functions would expect such a file. So do you think that using log files, similar to what Node.js uses, would be an option for Python?
Unfortunately, I don't know much about dependency management, and I certainly know nothing about how it's used in Node, so I didn't even know there was something called log files. There is definitely work on dependency management in Python happening. If you're using the pip tool, at least, pip has aggressively been pushing upgrades to pip itself that have better algorithms and user interfaces for dependency management. And I think we can see more out of that team.
Okay. But I think it's still, right now, it's more like, okay, it's more war. Like, do we gonna use pip or conda? What's better? No, I think it's not the question what's better. They do and have completely different usage. But that's really interesting. Okay, but it's great to hear that something will happen on this. Tanya.
And also, is it pip? Well, the latest pip already has dependency resolution. So it's pip 20?
Right.
21, right?
21.
21, yes, 21. But there are also a lot of other efforts like PipM, for example, Poetry, that are aimed to help with dependency management and resolution. I think PipM is a bit more, it integrates concepts from things like NPM, jar, and bundler. So that might be something that folks might want to check. Where is that? Oh, yes. This is controversial. I like the controversial. Do you think university curriculums should have Python as the first programming language, or is C++ best?
Is that controversial? I thought there was like plenty of research that shows that it's absolutely better to teach Python first before you start with other languages. I mean, I've seen publications about that in the ACM where they had like results from a whole bunch of schools that had switched to Python as their first language they teach, and sort of compared the success rate of students to previous approaches.
I think it is. Python is certainly more friendlier to folks. It has like much better syntactic sugar. Well, has a lot of syntactic sugar that C++ doesn't have. I would have certainly learned better programming if it had been Python as opposed to C++ or Fortran or assembly. But what are you going to do?
There are a lot of university departments that have to make this decision independently from everyone else.
Right. But I think as we started to talk a little bit once again about different, let's say, comparison between languages, and there was some questions related to it, but still there is one question back from our community, and it's exactly about, like, do you think any other programming language will completely overtake Python in the near future?
Oh, in the near future, that sounds pretty unlikely, given the sort of the trend lines from the last 10 years or so. And in the far future, who knows, because Python itself could become so much better.
Great. And Tanya, what do you think about it? I'm just curious.
About Python getting better, I certainly hope. I can't say what the route for Python or any programming language is going to look like in 10 years. I certainly have no clue. Everything just evolves and changes so fast. I struggle to keep up with stuff sometimes.
Right. Next in the line?
I don't know if this is a real question. And how do you pronounce, and I'm going to try async IO. That's the correct way.
I say async IO.
I was not sure. It's like, I think it's async IO. But like, circling back to you joining Microsoft, hopefully this means more or better support for Python in Azure. We hope. Is this something that you're actively pursuing, encouraging, or is it more like the engineering teams have their roadmap and their plans and then occasionally check with you or ask for advice?
Yeah, I don't actually have much to say about Azure. Azure is its own division with its own planning and engineering teams. And I have talked to a few people there. They're aware that their Python support is not great, and they're doing what they can to improve it. So whether or not they talk to me about it, I think that's an area where we'll see improvement, because Microsoft is very sensitive to things like Python being listed as the most popular programming language in various surveys.
Right. Okay, but now let's move from Microsoft and get back to the core of Python. And some Pythonists actually like to exploit every dynamic capability in Python, where others believe in a stricter way of writing code with typing and not messing with, for example, metaclasses. Where do you stand, Guido?
I think that you should, well, I'm making up the numbers, but I think 90% of the time you should use the stricter style and sort of use established simple idioms and don't do crazy dynamic shit. 10% of the time you're faced with a problem where using a meta class that updates the list of methods is just the only way you can accomplish what you want. I also I experienced significant sort of growth and maturation of Python code bases, especially during my 7 years at Dropbox. And my opinion is that when you're early in a project, maybe when you're a startup and you got a great idea and you want to sort of get to a working service as soon as possible, you can do all the crazy dynamic shit you want because it will probably save you time. And it being a startup, it's a very sort of high risk thing, and sort of they're being able to code quicker by using these tricks. I mean, you have to have like really good coders for that, of course, but that's the people who do the engineering for early stage startups. It's fine to do all that crazy shit when you're getting into a stage where you're your application is successful, and this is just because you have the right mix of features that attract users, then you end up sort of having to deal with scaling your application, and then probably some of the dynamic tricks will serve you less well, and so you should sort of choose a more conservative style for your code. So it's really hard to say sort of always do it this way or always do it that way. I mean, I'm fond of the dynamic features, but sometimes I really see them overused.
Right, but I think it's really brilliant piece of advice, especially for really fast-growing startups and just for engineers who build in POCs and then completely forgot that it's not time for POC anymore. It's time to scale, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You need a different attitude about your code and about everything else, of course.
Of course. Guido, people are very curious about the books that you have on your bookshelf. Can you tell us about what kind of books you like reading, what kind of books we can see there? Any interesting readings you've come across recently?
My bookshelves are actually a mess. There's like, this whole section is Dutch books that mostly I brought with me 25 years ago when I moved to the States, and many of them I have not actually looked into them, but I like having them. Here's a whole bunch of English literature. This is my collection of computer science, which includes like half a shelf on dead languages. Sorry, I don't know if you could follow any of that. Was I close enough to the mic?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, we could hear you. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, but if you look carefully, you'll see that I have a whole bunch of thick books by Neil Stephenson. He's one of my favorite science fiction authors. I'm currently reading something that he co-wrote actually during the 90s. It's some kind of political thriller, but it still feels like typical Neil Stephenson, so I'm enjoying it. It's called Interface. I also like William Gibson, who also wrote something called Interface, I believe. Which is also, I think, worthwhile.
Whoa.
Yeah. So some people were very interested in knowing if you actually liked sci-fi books, and I think you do. It's fair to say you do.
Yeah, I've not been like a science fiction reader from early days. I've sort of come to appreciate the science fiction genre more in the last 2 decades or so.
And Neil Stephenson is very on the cyberpunk side of things, right? Like post-cyberpunk.
That was his very early work. Yeah, which I started reading him. I think the first book was Cryptonomicon, which is not so much cypherpunk. It's more like a puzzle thriller. But you read Neil Stephenson because of the sort of insanely detailed descriptions of locations and activities.
That's fascinating. I always find very interesting to know what other folks enjoy reading.
My favorite Neil Stephenson is probably Anathem.
Anathem? Oh, I've never read that. I'll have to add it to my ever-growing list of books that I have to read.
In your streaming list of books, right?
It's massive.
Cool. I think it's nice about books, but let's get back to Python again and the open source. So, it's really simple, straightforward question, Guido. Do you work on other open source packages right now? And if yes, or projects, which ones?
I would say the only other thing that I occasionally contribute to is MyPy. Cool. I think that's the only thing where I've committed anything besides CPython.
Whoa. It's really great.
So maybe I'm too specialized.
No.
You never know.
No, I think, well, it's okay. Some people find their niche or their area where they like contributing or working in, and that's good. But in your opinion, what are some of the most promising or exciting projects in the Python ecosystem, like in 2021? Do you have any favorite, any that you recommend folks to check out?
Well, if you haven't heard of Jupyter Notebooks yet, of course, that's like a whole category on its own. And also like machine learning libraries like PyTorch are very important, and of course, data science things like pandas. But that I have no like sort of secret recommendations about this thing that nobody has heard of yet that you should absolutely check out.
Aliona, do you have any projects that you're particularly excited about?
Oh, I think I'm a little bit negative person today. I can create a list of projects that I don't recommend to use. I think it's not for this event, actually.
No, that's
oh my gosh.
That could be an interesting list for sure.
Yeah, definitely. But, it's like spending some time on productionizing the codes of the data scientists that you need to extract somehow from Jupyter Notebooks and trying to find some sense in it. It's pretty...
yeah, I hope everyone has seen this talk called I Don't Like Notebooks.
Yeah, so I think it's like there is always pros and cons. I think it's the same story. If you want to rapid prototype something, it's the best ever place to do it. But if you want to make the next step, please make the step to real scripts.
I think a lot of stuff circles back to this, like every tool and every approach has its place in time. There are things for which the notebooks are amazing, and then eventually you get to a limitation and you have to switch. I think, Aliona, you have a question?
Yep. So I think it's controversial, actually. And it says, Guido, when did you see Python become a primary language? Woo, what a question.
The question is, what exactly does primary refer to here? I'm guessing maybe like sort of the idea is when did it become a general programming language, or is this about like, oh, 1 second, there's something in the chat. One of the big five.
One of the big five, right?
Okay, that's a very different. Well, that's happened quite a while ago. I'd say maybe 15 years ago, Python started showing up maybe in the top 10, and it kept going forward. I remember that at some point I was actually personally very surprised to see that Python had overtaken Perl, because I know in the 90s there was some friendly competition between Perl and Python, and I showed up on conferences that were sort of full of Perl hackers. I remember having dinner with Larry Wall at some point and Tom Christensen. And I remember witnessing a random Perl user sort of approaching Larry Wall in the hallway of a conference and asking, "Are you worried about Python?" And I don't know if I'm making this up, but sort of Larry had this giant tea mug in his hand, and looking over the tea mug, he said something like, "I'm not worried."
I think it can be a motto, I'm not worried.
Well, yeah, it's famous last words, but
right.
that's sort of but I still believe there's something wrong with the way these statistics are gathered if they claim that Python is ahead of Java or JavaScript. That makes me question what the methodology of the survey is. And maybe it's just sort of asking a bunch of GitHub users what they like most, which may not give a representative answer for the whole industry, because of course there are a lot of people who never ever go to GitHub or would never ever answer a survey there.
Yeah, I
think
think
those people all write Java code.
Yeah, makes sense. I think the core of the all enterprise legacy system still in Java. Right. Tanya.
Do you listen to podcasts? I'm getting all of the non-Python related questions now.
Let's do that now. We can switch.
Person, I basically only listen to that kind of stuff when I'm driving, and I still, by and large, just tune into the local NPR station, which is National Public Radio for people outside the US.
And what kind of podcasts do you normally enjoy? Are they technical, related to anything Python programming, or
no? I never
completely different
to anything technical. I just listen to like news or interviews with authors. There's a particular interviewer on American Public Radio who is very good, and I always, when I had a longer commute, I would always love to listen to her shows. But now, since COVID, I don't drive much anymore, and when I drive, I'm usually with my family in the car, and we're on our way to some hike or bike destination, and we don't listen to the radio, we just talk.
That sounds
maybe
like
I'm just getting old and showing an older style lifestyle. I mean, about getting old, I still receive paper news, and I read the news. I read the news on paper next to my breakfast every morning. If you still know what the paper newspaper is.
Oh, of course.
I know.
Of course, yeah. Unfortunately, I consume my news in digital media.
Well, I also have the New York Times app on my phone, but especially during the last US administration, it got to be kind of annoying.
Oh.
It's a certain name that kept showing up in the headlines.
Okay. I think we have like the last two questions, and let's do differently. Tanya, pick up the next question so you get the technical one, and I pick the last. Let's do this.
Oh, okay. Do you think machine learning or data science is overshadowing other use cases for Python?
That's a good question, and I don't know that even if it is overshadowing other uses, that's terrible. I mean, Python is a good language for that kind of applications because they're hybrid systems. There's a framework probably written in C++ in the case of PyTorch or TensorFlow and those kind of things. And there's user interface, which has to be programmable, and Python is a perfect solution for that. So it's really nice that it's that these are hybrid systems where you write code in Python that then runs code written in other languages. Overshadowing, I don't know. I hope that people will still sort of teach programming in the context of other problems besides machine learning. I hope that we don't get a generation of Python programmers who sort of put Python on their resume, but all they know is how to open a notebook and type some lines that call some pandas functions. Because that's sort of, yes, Python is great for that, but that sort of knowing that skill doesn't make you a Python programmer.
I think it's the gold words, really. Gold. Pure gold. Yeah. But you know, from the other side, if you're really good, let's say, in statistical things, and if you don't aim to build a model or something like this, and if you're really just good at exploration of data, and it's not necessary to be a programmer. You can just use Python as a tool, as the people use Excel or something different, just to get whatever you want.
Yeah. That's of course. I mean, Python is meant to be a tool for people who have other stuff they want to get done. And sort of, I have to admit that 30 years ago, Python was meant to be a tool for people who were full-time C programmers. And that has evolved. And now it's sort of, in the early 2000s, it also, and late 1900s, 1990s, it became a tool for scientists who were doing science with large amounts of numbers and wanted to do visualization and filtering and all kinds of stuff. And that sort of that got the NumPy movement started. And then based on that, data science and then machine learning adopted Python as sort of their language of choice.
Yeah, I agree. So we have still some questions. I think there will still coming, but we have space only for one, and I will just randomly pick one of them. And I think, yeah, let's just pick this. So Guido, what do you think personally about virtual events? So do you have any of the events that you would love to visit in the diary?
Virtual events like what we're doing here. It's great to participate in some sense, and it's sort of easy that I don't have to pack my suitcase and book a plane ticket and travel to wherever you would be holding this conference in the real world, because I probably wouldn't be participating unless there were a lot of other things I also wanted to do in the same location. So I think virtual events are just a different kind of thing. I personally very much miss in-person events, and even for a meeting, even for like a simple 3-person panel as we're having here, it would be great if we were actually all in the same space, because there is a whole bunch of communication that is not possible through the screen. And you're all sitting there with headphones on your head, and maybe there's distracting stuff going on in your house, or you have something weird on your wall that maybe shouldn't be there. I mean, I've seen plenty of strange stuff in people's backgrounds. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. I miss in-person events dreadfully, and honestly, the sort of, I don't mind talking occasionally. I almost never watch an event myself. Like watching a presentation where someone sort of presents some PowerPoint slides with bullets and graphics, and then they talk. It is very different to see that happen in a sort of a space where there's proper lighting and there's no distraction, or maybe you're there with the rest of the audience. And I miss so much being part of an audience. So I hope that we'll get through this. I'm confident we will, but I can't wait.
Yeah. I think that's also something I definitely miss. Like miss the people, miss interaction with folks in real life. Hopefully we'll get back to that sometime soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, it's as well opened the doors for a lot of opportunities, because if not that, we'll not be doing this or that. So maybe we'll not, probably, it's it was impossible to see it with 3 of us because we are located in completely different locations, like United States, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Tanya, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
So yeah. So thanks a lot, Guido.
We'll probably keep doing virtual events where it makes sense.
Yeah.
But we'll also go back to in-person events.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think we already have a proposal for the next event, which will be called Ask Me More session with Guido. So
okay, well, next year.
Yes, I do hope. It's really great. Thank you for your time so much. So despite all the time differences, you are always here and you're answering all these questions. Wow, thanks a lot.
That's been awesome.
Thank you very much, Guido.